Hello, I'm Connor McReynolds, and welcome to The Dinner Party. In this podcast, I ask guests to tell me about their dream dinner parties. I want to know the setting, the menu, and the guest list, who they are, why they're invited, and what the conversation would go like. This week, I could not be more excited to be speaking to one of my absolute favourite comedians, Laura Lexx. Laura's a two-time Chortle Award winner for Best Compare. She's won the Comedian's Choice Award at the Edinburgh Fringe in 2018 for her amazing show, Trying. She's been on Live at the Apollo, and recently she went viral with her hilarious tweets about her imaginary life with Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp. This led to the release of her brilliant book, Klopp Actually, with another novel from Laura coming in 2022. She's such a fascinating person. I really can't wait to hear all about her dream dinner party. So here she is. This is the wonderful Laura Lexx. Laura Lexx, thank you so much for joining me on the dinner party. How are you today?
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm hastily cramming gigs into my week until the guidelines change and I can't anymore. So
Yeah,
I'm saying yes to everything, no matter what it is.
it's exciting. Did you do much of the kind of drive-in stuff and online stuff and all that kind of
I
thing?
really didn't. Do you know what? I was a complete coward about the online stuff, if I'm honest, and I
Yeah.
barely did any of it. And then with the drive-in stuff, I did do one, but luckily the guidelines changed a couple of days before the gig, so they were actually allowed to sit outside of their cars.
That
Uh,
helps a lot.
and
Yeah.
then by that point, sort of slightly easier gigs were coming in. So I have kind of got away with it a little bit in terms of the gigs over this.
Yeah. Well, you've also, I mean, in perhaps the absence of sort of regular gigs or usual gigs that you were going out to, you've certainly not wasted your time. You have had an eventful lockdown.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of stand-up, I think I love stand-up, and stand-up is quite sacred to me. And stand-up is something that like rescues me from time to time. And I was
Hmm.
really cowardly and scared of breaking it by trying to do it over Zoom and it not feeling right, or I don't know. And so when lockdown happened and it sort of all got taken away, I was very aware
Hmm.
that I was sort of on a precipice of I could feel really bad about this, or
Yeah.
I could find
Yeah.
other ways to get that outlet without like bringing stand up into it. So I sort of
Yeah.
ended up doing like live YouTube readings and a lot of writing and a lot more Twitter stuff, but just because I was like I need that connection, but I'm so frightened of losing stand up as this like beacon of all that is happy in my life.
Of course. Yeah. How have you felt sort of going back to gigs? What was that first gig like when you went back to it kind of proper?
Well, the first driving gig, oh, if it had been this time last year, I'd have come off spitting feathers going, that was unplayable. That was not a gig. There's no way that could have gone well. But honestly, I walked off and like you're telling these jokes that you know are killers and you can faintly hear in the distance like from 300 yards away. But I came off feeling like I played Wembley. It's like, I'm the queen of the world. So it was like, I sort of felt like I was like, oh, it's all the adrenaline of when I first started doing stand up, but without the,
Yeah.
I'm not terrible anymore. Like, it's the best of both
Yeah.
worlds.
Oh my God, that's such a lovely feeling. It's been so nice like with Jericho comedy over the summer. We've been doing quite a few of these drive-in shows and outdoor gigs and seeing everybody coming back after like 4 months away and doing their first gig and seeing these comics that I like look up to and worship and think, God, I wish I could be a quarter as good as you are. And they were all so nervous. Like
Yeah.
it was really
Well,
weird.
because
We don't have that position of just saying, "Oh, well, I was good at this 4 months ago, so obviously I'm going to be great at it
no,
again
it's
tonight."
muscle memory. It's like being a verbal athlete. Like I genuinely sat in the green room before that first gig back and watched my Live at the Apollo set just to remind myself what my jokes were and how I flowed into them. Because you can look at it on a list on your piece of paper, but it
Yeah.
doesn't remind you of all of those smooth little bits that you'd created to bounce from one to the other and those extra little toppers that like a lot of us just don't write them down because you're gigging 6 times a week. So you're saying them every day. So they're just in your muscle memory. And then
Yeah,
4 months
yeah.
off, there you go.
It's mad. I always convinced myself I could never forget any of my material because I wrote it and it came from my head and that's where it lived. And then, yeah, as you say, when you don't do it for a while, you just it's so strange how it can kind of just disappear. But then it
Yeah.
seems to come back quite quickly as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that love for it like pulls it right back,
Yeah,
and sort of doing new stuff, and like that's been lovely. It's been lovely gigging again. I'm going to be
yeah.
sad when it vanishes.
Oh, well, fingers crossed it sort of the Tories are slow to do things as they have been so far. Kind of double-edged sword. Bad
It's
for health,
difficult, isn't it?
good for us and our egos.
Yeah. Let's hope
But
the weather
you
holds.
mentioned your live at the Apollo set, and it's been such a kind of, certainly from the outside anyway, maybe I'm wrong in saying it, but it seems like it's been such an exciting couple of years for you, really, from winning the kind of the 2018 Comedian's Choice Award at the Fringe. You did live at the Apollo later that year, to this year and everything it's brought. Um, and obviously, you were supposed to be out on tour this year with your 2019 show Knee Jerk. Has all the exciting stuff that's happened this year kind of helped with the disappointment of missing out on that tour?
Um, yes. Obviously, this year has been bizarre. Um, I think I think the last couple of years have been amazing.
Hmm.
However, it's much easier to feel like that from my position now where I know what's happened. I think a
Yeah.
big problem with this career and with all careers really, and just with life in general. Oh, I'm so philosophical. Is is that you're made to feel like you've got to have this momentum, and people like to write stories where overnight successes happen and one good thing
Hmm.
happened and then all of the good things happened. When I did Live at the Apollo in 2018, it went out in December. And then I got nothing else for a year. There was nothing. I just went back to the circuit, carried on gigging. Nobody offered any television.
Mm.
Nobody offered anything. Um, and my career stayed pretty much exactly the same. And I spent that entire year wondering what I'd done wrong, going,
Hmm.
oh, wait, what? This isn't what's happened to other Live at the Apollo comedians. They did it well. And then they were sensations. What did I do wrong? How did I screw it up? And then, like, from a year onwards, I think I then filmed Hypothetical. And then since then, I filmed more and more and more sort of TV is in the diary, and then obviously getting the book deal. So I think like in writing my story, it will look amazing. It'll be like within 2 years this happened. But as a human
Yeah.
being, you're watching other people get success. So even a month with nothing moving you along, we're not set up to deal with that. We feel like we're being forgotten. And I
Yeah.
think like this year has taught me to relax, that a year is very short in terms of a career, and not to
Hmm.
panic if I go 2 months without a noticeable measure of moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, that seems like a very good lesson to be able to take away. I'm very envious that you kind of have that sort of Zen approach to it because I don't think that's something I have.
Yeah, well, I'm not Zen. That's the thing, I think, is I'm not Zen, but like I think it's important to talk about it now that I've from a position of relative success to say, look, like you don't know what's around the corner. And I know that these are really easy platitudes to throw out to other people listening that feel a bit stuck in their lives or their careers. But, in 2017, I was living in a 2-bedroom flat and kind of like, I want a pet, but I can't have a pet because I've got the flat and we don't have a garden. And in order
Hmm.
to get the garden in the house, I need my career to go better, but I'm not in control of my career going better. And I also couldn't conceive a child at the time and was just like, nothing is in my control. Ugh. And
Yeah.
then it seems mad to me now that 3 years later, I'm in the house, I've got the dog, I've written and published a novel in the last 6 months, and my career is taking steps. But I think you have to, for your own sake, for nothing else, you have to learn that this amount of time that feels insurmountable and people rushing past you to succeed while you are having a pause,
Hmm.
it will seem small when you look back at it.
Yeah, that's a really good lesson. That's definitely something I will find myself listening back to. I'm sure quite a lot. I'm such a big fan of you. I mean, I saw you. I was very lucky to see a few years ago, a few times gigging and emceeing at Comedia, which is just the nicest
Yeah, it's
comedy
lovely.
venue in the world. And I saw trying the show that you kind of mentioned there, where you dealt with a lot of the things that you've just spoken about. Trying at the Edinburgh Fringe, which was just an amazing show. I think I read something from you in an interview where you said that trying was perhaps a little bit of a departure for you, kind of talking about something very personal and kind of very significant, very important. Um, did that show and did the experiences in life that you kind of dealt with in trying, has that kind of served as a sort of turning point in terms of the topics that you're kind of drawn to? Or was it a case of, I've done that, it's done now and I'm going to do something quite different or go back to what I was doing before. Um,
Um, I think in terms of comic ability, it was a massive learning curve. So yes, I'm quite a stand-up purist. um, I like stand-up to be very funny, and I like stand-up to be very punchy. So my preferred gag rate is much closer to a 20-minute Saturday night club set than to
mhm,
the average comedy hour about serious issues. And I'm trying to
mhm.
word this very carefully now, so I don't sound like I'm slagging off anybody that does. Uh, Edinburgh hours about serious issues, but I like a fast pace and I like comedy to be really very jokey. So my first two Edinburgh hours were like that. Well, the first one didn't have enough gags, and I took the feedback for that. All the reviews sort of said like, she's nice, it's fun, but the gag rate is slow. So then when I came back with my second hour, I was like, this thing is going to be full of jokes. And I filled it full of jokes. And it had a few sort of punches towards meaning in it, but really, I didn't have any tragedy in my life. So what was I supposed to stand up and be like, this was really difficult? It would just be patronizing to everybody else that had been through things.
Yeah.
Um, and then when it came to writing my third show, I'd had to have a year off because I'd been so ill. I'd sort of had to get used to being on medication. I'd had to stop everything and go through therapy and get my life back on track.
Mhm.
Um, and I could only write about that because it was all I was doing. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you
of
like
course.
writing stand up is like, distilling what's going through your head, and all that was going through my head is climate change, pregnancy, not pregnancy, do I want babies anyway, depression and all this junk. So I had to write the show about that, but it also had to stay true to me and it had to keep that clubby gag rate. Um
Yeah.
which is what I tried to do, and that was a great success. But then coming back the year after to do another show, I realized one that I'd done trying too early for myself personally. It was far too quick to be talking about that sort of stuff with that
Okay.
candidness. Um, and I liked doing the show, but when you do a show that's that personal and that honest, it draws people to you and they want to share their stories. And that was lovely. And I
Yeah.
like to talk
Yeah.
to people and I like to try and be helpful, but I was not strong enough to be trying to do that at the time. So I made a mistake personally there. But professionally, it opened lots of doors. So when I then came back to do the next show, I was braver in terms of the subjects that I could take on, but I made a point with Knee Jerk that there was going to be next to nothing personal in it. So I hit on
Mhm.
social issues. I looked very much at like how my feminism is intersectional and how I support trans rights. I looked at Brexit and I looked at internet abuse and the way humans interact with each other, and so I hit just as hard hitting topics, but they were
Yeah.
not personal to me. So I'm quite reactionary to my stand up. I look at what I just did and I go, oh, okay, what do I need to do next? But I think
Yeah.
the thing that always rings true and carries on with my comedy is that my joke rate remains anything I do in an Edinburgh show, I could do on a Saturday night in front of drunk punters in, a
Yeah.
city centre club.
It's something that really floored me with trying. I mean, obviously it was so personal and like yeah, like very raw. I mean, you were talking about recent experiences and stuff. I mean, you created such a a really unique atmosphere in the room. I sort of can't really describe it. I mean, people can watch it on Next Up, and that'll give you maybe a slight flavor of it. But being in the room is a very different experience to watching Tate stand up. But you did keep that gag rate and Yeah, I mean, like a classic example is your joke about lifting the lid on antidepressants. Such a brilliant, brilliant joke on such a really important topic. And it's a real skill. But yeah, you've had that experience. Knee Jerk was perhaps a little more kind of still very important show, but perhaps putting self-preservation a little bit more at the fore. Do
Yeah.
you think you'll be drawn to kind of another more personal show, or do you think you find the nice balance with Knee Jerk there?
I think yes, I will get more personal again. For example, the material I'm writing at the moment is very much about my body. Um,
Hmm.
I think like I really struggle with body image, and I really struggle with accepting what I look like. And I think like I've been mulling on that a lot and sort of thinking like getting a bit frustrated with the body positivity movement because I want to be able to moan about my body if I want to. And I
Hmm.
feel like sometimes you get shut down quite quickly with that. You know, you kind of go like, "Oh, I hate my legs," and one of your girlfriends will go, "Oh, you're only saying that because of the patriarchy," and you think, "No, I'm not. It's cellulite. It's not the patriarchy." And then I've been sort of like, but maybe it is the patriarchy. Like, am I just caught in this sort of world? So, but I
Hmm.
think like the more I've thought on it, the more I'm like, well, actually, my body hasn't given me the things I wanted. Like, I couldn't have that baby, so can I be mad at my body, please? Like, and I think
Hmm.
so. I think maybe the beginnings of what I'm writing at the moment are about like we're trying to live in a world where we're really fair to everybody and really fair to each other. So, how
Hmm.
much are we allowed to beat ourselves up? Like, we're humans.
Yeah.
We've got to have that outlet somewhere. We can't all be zen. I can't do it. I get angry and frustrated, and I would rather
Yeah.
be mean to myself than anyone else. So, what are the limits on that? So, I think that's maybe where I'm sort of aiming my brain at the moment, or that's what I'm thinking about just in my personal life, and therefore that's what I'm sort of ending up writing jokes about. So
Yeah.
perhaps my
Yeah.
next stand-up stuff that's on a bigger subject will be a mix of my own experiences of falling out with my body and my mind. Like, I have mental health issues, which means I can't always trust my thoughts, and
Yeah.
then my body couldn't produce a baby. uh like, can I be mad at myself? But like kind of wrapping that
Yeah.
in with a lot of social commentary of why have I been mad at my body since I was 15 and I wasn't skeletally thin? Like, what
Yeah.
caused that? What are the body image issues that, yeah, so maybe both, I think.
It's so that sounds so interesting. And I wish I could kind of I wish I could talk to you all day about it because it's such a fascinating area of like relationship with self. It's something that I've thought about so much. I do a little bit of like mental health stuff with Movember and with Mind and kind of
Mm,
talking a little bit about it. And every every word that we use for our relationship with self, you know, like self-interest, self-centered, even like self-care or self-obsessed, all these things are so negative and we're so discouraged to have a healthy relationship with self. But certainly, like my experiences with mental health, I had to learn to have a slightly better relationship with self and not beat myself up if I was a little bit sometimes self interested or a little bit
mm,
self obsessed. Because if I wasn't, then I just stood no chance of getting better. But it's such a fascinating thing about what sort of okay to the kind of relationship to have with yourself, and if it's not okay to have that relationship with yourself, then who's saying it's not?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I really can't wait to see where that sort of train of thought brings you.
Yeah, it's half
Is
a
is
joke at the moment, but one day it'll.
are you sort of hoping for like maybe 2021 Edinburgh type thing, or is it too
No,
early to
because
think about that?
I'm owed a year off Edinburgh. I was taking 2020 off Edinburgh, and then everybody else copied me and called it a pandemic. So I'm owed a year off while everybody else is slaving away, and I'm not there. So I don't think I'm going to go in 2021.
That sounds entirely fair.
One, I just don't think we'll have a vaccine by then. I don't even know if it'll go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Two, I would love it if more people boycotted it for a bit longer and we had some sort of reset on the financial cripplingness of
God,
the
yes.
comedy up there, because it just is not, it's not sustainable for me as a comic, and I'm a successful comic, not to sound like a
Yeah.
complete twat, but like
No, no, not at all.
people that sort of don't have any financial stability, are just excluded from it, and we just kind of go,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay, then your comedy doesn't matter. And I just don't
100%.
subscribe to that, and I think there's better ways of doing it that are less,
Yeah.
that are more carbon friendly. Like I really think by the time the Edinburgh Fringe comes back, flyers will hopefully be a thing of the past.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And maybe we could sort of work on other ways to make it more sustainable for diversity and for comedy's sake, and financially for even the people that are privileged.
God, that sounds brilliant. You should be the director of this new festival, Laura.
Ooh, no, thank you. That sounds like responsibility.
Right. Well, Laura, you've so kindly given up your time to tell me all about your dream dinner party today. So I'm going to have to get into that because I'm so excited to talk to you about the brilliant guests that you've put together for this. Before we get into like the specifics of it, are you someone who enjoys hosting dinner parties generally?
Yes, yeah, I am. Yes, I do. I'm not a going out person, so I love to have
Yeah.
people over, and I like cooking for people. Yes, I really do like hosting.
And what's the sort of what's a dinner party at Laura Lexx is like? Does it descend into drunken
Yes.
frivolity and madness? Yeah.
Not so much frivolity and madness. It probably descends into drunken board games.
Oh,
It
that's
started
great.
with sober board games, then we had a break to eat, and then we probably got significantly drunker while playing more games. My husband and I are massively into board games, and so we've cultivated a friend circle that are also into board games. And that's just my favorite way to be, is hanging out with people, like taking the game half seriously, depending on the game. And and yeah, that's my favorite kind of
Oh,
evening.
that sounds really super. So, Laura, if you were hosting this dinner party for this extraordinary group of people that you put together, if you could do it anywhere in the world, uh, where on planet Earth or even beyond would you do it?
Well, I'm going all out for this.
Okay,
However,
I love it.
I've thought about this. So I know anywhere in the world, but I've got a couple of people that I want to cater for a little bit. So
Oh,
I haven't gone very far away from home, to be honest. And I'm going to say that's for carbon reasons. I don't want to fly these people around the world, but it's not. It's just that I thought of this place and I was like, oh, I can make this beautiful. I've chosen Bodiam Castle in Sussex. So
ooh,
it's a 14th century castle. You can visit it. I don't know if it's open actually, but it's National Trust. And it's basically like an amazing moated castle. And it's got all four walls, and then the inside is ruins. It's just all sort of grass and just the remainder of walls.
hmm.
Now, here's what I'm thinking. You know the episode of Friends where Ross marries Emily
I
in the
do know
tumble down
this.
castle? I want it
Yeah.
all decorated like that, okay? Um,
Perfect.
now the most also, because money is no object for my thing,
Of
an
course.
enormous bug net has been put up over the entire castle, but in a sort of dome far away so that you can't see it because you have to be able to see the stars. It's also a starry night, and it's warm. It's like t-shirt weather all evening, but not so warm that you're sweaty, but just like sitting out warm, you know?
I
Um,
love this.
Thanks. So we're all sitting around outside. Now, the most important feature is the chairs. The
Oh,
chairs
wow.
have to be very comfortable. So if you want a sort of Roman style chaise longue, go for it. If you want like a reclining armchair, go for it. That's fine. And we're not having a table for the meal. We're
Ooh.
having a gantry has been erected over the castle. Again, we can't see it and it's covered in fairy lights. And the food is coming down on pulleys so that little like tables just appear around your chair and you can pick at things, but you don't have to sit up at a table, so you don't get backache. You don't have to like sit over an uncomfortable waistband. You can sit however you like. You can change your chair halfway through if that makes you happy, and the food will just appear sort of coming down out of the sky around you.
That is the dream. That is amazing. I have never spoken to anybody who's given so much thought to the type of chairs. This is
Well, because
brilliant.
I hate being uncomfortable. The other night we went out for dinner to this lovely sushi restaurant in Brighton, but because of COVID, they put up these flappy plastic things in between the booths, but you
Oh
couldn't
yeah.
lean on them. So I was sort of trying to like really eat a lot of sushi, but sitting on a stool with nothing to lean my back against. And I'm all
Oh
for
no.
posture, but I don't have it. And I just was miserable because my back just started to ache really early on in the meal, and it was rubbish. And I
Oh,
always
that's
get to
not
that
good.
point where like you're having a nice time and everybody's sitting around with wine and stuff, but then you're like, oh, I really want to go and sit comfortably, but I don't want to break the vibe. So I just want the
Yeah.
whole of my dinner party vibe to be comfortable.
Oh, that's brilliant. Start as you mean to go on. Just
Yeah.
everybody feeling relaxed and good. Oh, that is perfect. That is so brilliant. So we know where we're going to be. I can picture the warm weather, the food just appearing out of the sky. This is the dream. Uh, and
Like a
your
fire
first
pit, so you've got
guest.
something to watch. You don't have to make
Oh, God,
eye
yes.
contact. Eye contact's the worst. So if there's a fire, you can just look into the fire, and then conversation flows better.
That's so true. It would be really weird if there was a fire there and anyone chose eye contact.
Yeah,
That's
gross.
the behavior of a
That's how you know they're a
sociopath.
pervert and they have to go home.
Well, your first guest is a comedian who's often found at the top of many of the kind of greatest ever comedian lists. He had, to say the least, an eventful life and a unique talent. You're inviting Richard Pryor.
Yeah. Um, so I knew I had to invite a comedian, just
Of
because I
course,
love
on brand.
comedy.
Yeah.
And it was a toss up between him and Eddie Izzard.
Oh,
However,
yeah.
Eddie Izzard, I feel like I could potentially still meet in real life. In fact, I did meet him once in the Grand Hotel in Brighton, and I said
Oh,
hello, and he was very
wow.
friendly. However, I've never met him in a professional capacity. Um, and the reason it was sort of a toss up between those two was that they probably are the two comedians that most showed me or influenced my comedy and showed me it was possible to do sketches and skits in a stand-up way. I love doing
Yeah.
little scenes, running around and playing all the characters, and I think like Richard Pryor does it with the most delicate touch I think I've ever seen a comedian touch a character with. The pauses and the moments of tenderness in a hilariously funny scene are just magical. Like I'm thinking of like I don't know if you've seen the scene where the spider monkey gets eaten and
No, I haven't.
Richard Pryor's doing the dogs and this huge Great Dane that his neighbor, I think his monkey dies. Rich Pryor had a spider monkey, and then the
Okay.
dog comes over and he's doing the voice of the dogs and he's been doing the voice of the monkey. He's been doing this like bit pretending to be the monkey just running around shagging everything. And then he's in the garden and he does the voice of this Great Dane padding over to him and he's like, hey, you all right, Rich? Yeah, my monkey died. And the dog just kind of goes, oh, I was going to eat that. And there's just this soulful moment where he's I don't want to overblow it because, you're not crying because his monkey's died, but the man had such... Is pathos the right word? I don't think I really know what that word means.
I think it sounds like it's appropriate to
Yeah,
the
sure. Let's
context
throw
here.
it in.
Yeah.
And if you think it means what I think it means, then we both agree it's the right word. And if you don't, insert the right word. You're cleverer than me. But he just had this tender, vulnerable energy, like fizzing with this energy. Oh my goodness, he's so funny. And then when you know about his personal life, like, just what a
Yeah.
fascinating man with such a scope for emotion.
It's really incredible. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I'm aware of the sort of the legend of Richard Pryor, and I've seen the odd clip. I watched a little bit before we were chatting. But I've been missing out on Richard Pryor, and it sounds really extraordinary. I mean, what do you think is the thing that makes him kind of endure? Why is he still considered possibly the greatest of all time? Is it the subjects he wrote about? Is it the way he performed them? Is it a combination of the two?
I think for me, with him, it's his performance. It's him. That's what it always is with a star, isn't it? It's him.
Hmm.
The material is brilliant. It's very tight. There's no fat on any of it. His subjects are varied. He's incessantly interesting.
Hmm.
Um, you never know what you're going to get. Like, you can't say, oh, Rich Pryor, he was the comedian that talked about what?
Yeah.
Everything, whatever was happening in his life. He's a Billy Connolly. Like, whatever's going on, he's talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's the Robin Williams effect of, you see this man on stage who can't stop entertaining, who is just brimming with everything, and
Mm.
there's
Hmm.
the vulnerability about it that makes you think, please, can we be friends? Is there anything I can do to make you happy, because you make me so happy? And it's the
Yeah.
voices, it's the layers in the comedy, it's the not being scared of silences, it's the flow of it all. um
It's sort of a cliche, like to say someone is just born with funny bones. Like people can really improve as comedians. You can get better at the writing. You can get better at the performance. But he seems like someone. You mentioned Robin Williams, such a perfect example as well of someone who's just doing exactly the thing they were meant to be doing, and that
mm,
can't be taught or honed or improved upon. That just
no.
is.
Yeah. And I feel like he's somebody that, like, the reason I'd have him at a dinner party where I didn't invite Robin Williams. No offense, Robin, I like you. But I feel like Richard Pryor, like, I feel like if Robin Williams comes to my dinner party, there's a good chance Robin Williams is going to be the only guest at my dinner party, because he's a lot. Whereas
Yeah.
I get and that's harshly unfair. I never knew him. I had no idea. But with Richard Pryor, I get the sense that he would be able to be himself behind the performer as well. And I
Yeah.
know Americans love a castle, so I think he'd really enjoy being in a 14th century castle.
That would be a very cool place to see Richard. I mean, it would be so out of his what seems anyway like his kind of cultural sphere. Going from city to city in the States. I doubt that he
Hmm.
had time to visit many English castles.
No, and Americans just love that old stuff, don't they? Like, you can show them something from like 1820 and they're like, "Whoa." So this is the 14th century. Like, oh,
He would
yeah.
lose his shit. Absolutely. What would you want to talk to him about or ask him about, or is it more a case of just being in his presence, or what would you sort of be hoping for with him there?
Um I don't know if I'd want to ask him anything. I don't know if I'd want to ask anything of him. I think I'd like to express what admiration I have for him. I
Hmm.
suppose there's a very egocentric part of myself that wants to sort of, in a childlike way, go, I know you died and before your time, but the
Mm.
things that you put out into the world are still there in comedy. Like, even in my sort of meager attempts, I'm nowhere near what he was doing, but like, I don't know, I'd want him to know that that had happened. I suppose I'm always drawn to people who have a sadness that can't help entertaining, that
Mm.
and it's not a selfless thing. It's not like, if I can make these people happy, I'll be happy. It makes me happy to do this.
Yeah.
Um I and I just, yeah, selfishly, I just want to hang out with him. I think he'd make me laugh. I think he'd make me laugh. Like, his whole life of, I mean, addiction, of his being black, his being male, his being a comedian in a completely different time to me, his
Yeah.
being a
Yeah.
comedian of a completely different level of success to me. These are all things that I would just listen to for hours. It's sort of like a life that I could hear about, and
Yeah.
any story he had to tell me, I think, why would I ever be sad to have heard it?
Yeah, that's so true. Oh, he's such a fascinating guy. And now after this conversation, I'm gonna have to go away and watch and listen to as much Richard Pryor as
There's
I
a
possibly
wonderful
can.
biography about him as well,
Oh,
which, if I'd googled it beforehand, I could tell you who wrote it. But it, yes, sort of really detailing his private life.
well, he sounds absolutely brilliant, and what a great first guest to kick off any dinner party. Your next guest is arguably the most popular White House press secretary of all time, and it's not Sean Spicer, listener. She was the press secretary to President Jed Bartlett in the political drama The West Wing, played by the brilliant Alison Janney. You're inviting CJ Craig.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, like, because one, she'd have to perform the jackal for me. Which, if you haven't seen The West Wing, it is one of the most brilliant moments in television you've ever seen. Yes, I'd like to meet that character. I'd like to hang out with uh someone that I think, to all intents and purposes, is almost like the opposite of me. Um,
Oh.
just this sort of brilliant with responsibility, work comes first, sort of almost all the time.
Hmm.
Tall, confident woman. She's such an icon. She's so intelligent and snappy and fighting. And like, what I love about her character is that even within this like horrifically idealized Democrat White House, she's still
Yeah.
fighting with them on equality that the men haven't noticed, or, things that haven't happened yet. She's
Yeah.
still pushing for change in those, and she pushes so competently. She can never be accused of sort of the shrillness or all the things that we get shot down with when we're trying to make a fuss.
Yeah.
She is
Yeah.
just relentlessly competent, and I find her, every time I rewatch West Wing, I just fall more in love with her because she's
It's a
vulnerable as well. And when she
yeah.
hurts, I break for her when she hurts.
Oh wow. She sounds like such a thrashed out and kind of three multi-dimensional character. It's great that there's all of that. Aaron Sorkin sometimes gets criticized, probably quite rightly, for not necessarily being able to write female characters very well.
Mm.
But CJ Craig certainly sounds like someone who is so well thought. How much of that do you think is down to the fact that it's Alison Janney playing her?
Well, yeah, you never know, do you? I think a lot. Like Alison Janney, I think is brilliant. Like even down to that 10 things I hate about you, cat with the mug. She's so funny. And I think people
Yeah,
that play funny well wrap so many more emotions in because the funny carries it along. You don't have to have
yeah.
these long drawn out shots where you're just watching somebody weeping, because there's a quick tear and it's a wipe away and a right, we're going to get on. And
Yeah,
just as much emotion uh has has been imparted towards you, but it's been done in a way that, like, who over the age of 15 has sat by a window watching the rain crying for 15 minutes? Nobody. But what you have done is quickly gone in the kitchen, pulled yourself together, and then had to go back out and get on with whatever you were doing. And I think CJ exemplifies that for me. I love that she is just relentlessly capable. And I think I watched The West Wing for the first time when I was about, I must have been 21, 22.
hmm
Um, and I was living in London in a house share that I really hated, and
hmm
working a day job that I really hated, and trying to get on with stand up, but working, like, I worked in Canary Wharf in like
Oh
sales,
God.
like suited and
Ugh.
booted every day, and then knobbing off to do stand up the rest of the time. And I look back now and I think, like, God, did I do that job for 2 years? How was that me? But this sort of woman that really sacrificed everything and then got where she wanted, and had to compromise along the way in terms of, like,
hmm
I'll lose this battle to win the next one, and got shouted down and didn't sulk about it, like got shouted down and then went and got on with her job again.
hmm
I don't know, maybe I read more into her than there is, but I think she'd be a brilliantly intelligent person to have at a dinner party, because her knowledge of current events and political events, which is not something I
Yeah.
have a strong knowledge on, um, would be breathtakingly insightful. But she's
Yeah.
still fun and good to hang out with.
She really seems it. You mentioned earlier that you thought she was in some respects like the opposite of you. But do you not think, particularly? I mean, I know that she becomes chief of staff later on, But in her role as press secretary, do you see any similarities between that and what you do? Like, particularly when you're kind of emceeing gigs, you're controlling the baying mob like she sometimes had to do.
Possibly, but I think she, like, yes, in terms of its public speaking and you have to think quickly, but I am very hesitant to have any responsibility or heavy impact on other people's lives that I haven't had a lot of time to think through. Um,
Hmm.
I don't enjoy the responsibility of imparting any. I don't mind talking about serious things, but I want to know I've had time to really think about them before I talk about them. So, for example,
Yeah.
like talking about trans rights in my last show, that
Hmm.
took me so long to work that out, what I wanted to say, and then to keep skimming the material to a point where I was like, pretty much just saying, this is what I think about it. I'm not trying to tell you anything. I'm trying to impart
Mm.
some facts and tell you my opinions. And I think, like, anybody that craves the responsibility that actually has direct influence and impact on people's lives,
Hmm.
they are much braver than I think I would want a life being.
Mm. It's it's really interesting, and yeah, like I share your kind of envy at someone who seems so naturally, well, probably not naturally, through bloody hard work and a lot of thinking and time spent understanding a topic. I feel like I know nothing about anything, so certainly having someone like CJ Craig there would, I would absolutely bask in that kind of aura of just being confident in who they are and knowing what they're talking about, and like the kind of conviction of being able to stick by their beliefs. Because I'm someone who, I'll express a strong opinion, someone will say, oh, actually, well, you haven't thought about this, and I was like, oh god, you're absolutely right, I'm so sorry, yes, of course
Yeah.
you're right and I'm wrong. She seems really great. I mean, what do you think she'd be bringing as a kind of dinner party guest? You mentioned that she's quite fun as well. You mentioned the jackal, the great kind of, and she has these moments of being really fun and
Mm.
light-hearted. Um, do
Well,
you think she'd be mucking in with the board games and?
I think she'd want a night off strategy. I think she'd want to. I think she'd want to sit. Here's what I think she'd bring. One, she'd wear an absolute banging evening gown. She scrubs up phenomenally. She turns up to everything looking perfect, and I love her for that, right? And she has the opposite body. Well, Alison Janney has the opposite body to me, so she'd be very tall and leggy. Oh, she'd look amazing. And secondly, I feel slightly guilty for inviting a fictional tough female politician, because perhaps I should have said Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez or Hillary Clinton or somebody female that isn't embarrassing in UK politics. But what CJ would bring for me is the nostalgia of having watched The West Wing at 2 points in my life. So once as a like young 20s, and once
Mhm.
about a decade later or so with my husband watching it again.
Mm.
Um, she is a character I feel like I've hung out with. And so that's why I'd want
Yeah.
her at my dinner party rather than someone else that could potentially bring the same other qualities in terms of the politics and the cleverness and the sassiness.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have that feeling about Ocasio Cortez, for example, and it's my dinner party.
They are brilliant reasons to choose her, and if AOC's listening, I'm sure she'll
Yeah,
understand.
it's no offense. I'd love to meet you, but you invite me to your party, you know?
And it's a very difficult brief. Who knows, if I'd given you more guests, maybe AOC would have got in there. But well, your next guest, it's time for another Richard. Not content with just Pryor, you're inviting the man known as the Kingmaker,
Mm,
Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick.
yeah.
Now, I am useless with history. I mean, I'm a terrible Irish person because I don't even know anything about Irish history. I promise you, I tried to understand who Richard Neville was and what he was about, but it just started sounding like Game of Thrones to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know enough about him. Could you tell anyone who's a bit dim like me a bit more about who he was and why on earth you're inviting him of all people to your dinner party?
So, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. we're talking Wars of the Roses era here. So
Mhm.
he was basically, and I do apologize for inviting like a straight white rich dude to my dinner party. However, he was, oh God, so which side did he start on? I want to get this right now. I've done a whole podcast episode of this on my own podcast. And I think I got it wrong there as well. So basically, Wars of the Roses kicks off. I'm going to Google this to get the names right because I'm forever getting names of kings wrong, as anybody that's listened to National Treasures will attest to. So, Wars of the Roses, right? We've got King Henry the
Yeah.
Sixth. He's a bit pathetic, and he's sort of a bit weak and rubbish, and none of the big barons like him, right? So
Okay.
there's kind of a load of fighting back. The Richard of York, the Gave Battle in Vain guy, he and all the other barons are all like, no, Henry's rubbish, right? Now, they kind of fight him, but I don't think they won. So you start the Wars of the Roses with Richard of York being like, I've got a claim to the throne. I'm going to take on Henry VI, right?
Okay.
He dies. And I think at this point, Warwick is on the side of the Yorkists. I'm just vaguely. Yes, yeah. So Warwick is on the side of the Yorkists, right? So Henry
Right.
dies, and there's this great historic. I mean, I say great in inverted commas, it's disgusting, but like Henry puts the heads of the traitors on spikes outside their family castle, right?
God.
Now, this then enrages Richard of York's son, Edward.
Yes.
And the Wars of the Roses continue with Edward then taking up the mantle of the fight his dad was having. So the Wars of the Roses go back and forth. But where Richard Neville is interesting is that Richard Neville is one of the richest people in the country, and he switches his allegiance a couple of times. So he was very firmly on the side of the Yorkists, was sort of funding them, supplying them. Warwick Castle was available for hiding out in, all that kind of jazz. And then he switched to supporting Henry. And it kind of knackered everything for Edward. And then I believe he did that basically because Edward married this woman called Elizabeth Woodville. And when Edward became king, so was he Edward II, I think? He put all of her family, Edward IV, actually, sorry. He put all of her family into positions of power. And the Earl of Warwick was a bit like, oh no, these Woodvilles are creeping too much power. It's all super bad. Nothing's good. Everything's bad. So he then tried to overthrow Edward IV by putting Henry back on the throne. I think they lost and they died. And then that's where Richard III comes into it, who is Edward IV's brother. So I just kind of find Neville fascinating because for like a 25 year period, he was in charge. Like at one point, he had two kings of England under his control, his capture, because Henry VI was sort of in prison, but they said he was feeble-minded, so he couldn't rule. And then Edward, who was then made king, like he was also under Warwick's control. And I think at one point, Edward, like the Earl of Warwick, captured him. So I just find it kind of fascinating that there was this point in history where just this rich bloke was much like, I don't know if you can imagine it, the idea that like shady characters that you don't really know much about, who don't get their names down in history, are subtly controlling politics from behind, and it's very confusing for the general public, but because that's where the money is, that's who's got the power. Like, I know it seems really hard to understand in this day and age, but I kind of find it fascinating. And like the Wars of the Roses themselves, sorry, I'm just nerding out now basically, but
no, this is wonderful.
the Wars of the Roses were crazy. Like I think it was the Battle of Towton is the bloodiest battle I think to ever have been fought on British soil, and I think more people died that day than in the Somme.
Oh my God.
I think. and I might be massively
That's
making up these facts, but it
mad.
was crazily bloody. And this is hand-to-hand combat. You know, you've got bows and arrows, but you've got no guns.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking just amazing. And then, like, later battles, so what was the battle? I can't remember. Anyway, there was one battle, right, where it was foggy and it really screwed up the battle. So there was this Earl, can't remember what his name is, maybe the Earl of Oxford or someone like that. He sent his
Uh-huh.
troops chasing a load of other troops away, and then sort of chased them away, got confused, turned round, and accidentally started on his own troops from behind because they'd got turned around in the fog. Like, the Wars of the Roses were just mad. And I think, like, really give you an insight into, like, what Brexit has done in terms of people suddenly having a side that was not a side that we had 5 years ago. We got given these, and
Yeah.
suddenly we're very firmly one way or the other. And the Wars of the Roses had to do that. It was called the Cousins' War because people just had their families torn apart by, you've got to support this or this. And people
God.
that were
Yeah.
previously neighbours or nearby villages or nearby counties just suddenly were murdering each other. And it was
Yeah, of
basically
course.
down
Yeah.
to guys like Richard Neville who 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 decided the power wasn't in the right place, and so started these nobles fighting against each other, and that resulted in the deaths of
That's
large percentages of the male population of the UK. Like, that's
That's
crazy, isn't it?
really mad. So, it's all absolutely fascinating, and one thing I didn't get, again, because I'm a little bit dim when it comes to history, I didn't really put together what you've so brilliantly done there, which like to show how relevant his situation and that whole conflict was to today's politics. But on a personal level, he does sound conniving and quite sinister and quite self-serving. So, what would you he would you do you think he'd be an enjoyable guest there, or just a really bloody fascinating one?
Well, I don't know because I don't know anything about his personality. So in terms of what he's
Okay.
bringing vibe-wise, no idea. I think he'd nail Risk. So
Yeah.
from the board game factor, at least we know who's winning that, right? Can you imagine an earl from the 1300s, the 1400s, arguing with CJ Craig on politics and who should have power? I'm here for that. And he doesn't even think women should have an opinion. Like, he's so mad at. I'm interested. But also, I'm fascinated by, like, you just said he's what did you say? Like, conniving, self-serving.
Conniving, yeah.
Yes, but he won't have seen himself as a bad guy or wrong in any way. So,
Yeah.
what does that look like? What do people who can order death for their own survival, are they wrong, or is this the medieval version of self-care that we were just discussing? Like, I have a bath with a candle and I take some self-care. Richard
He
Neville,
deposes
if he
kings.
is weak, is going to be murdered and his family are going to be raped and he's going to lose his castle and his livelihood. Is it self-care to be the murderous bastard on this English soil? Or was there I don't know what humanity looks like 600 years ago.
You're cementing your place as one of the most empathetic people I've ever heard speak. It's incredible that you're defending this man. It's great to hear. I mean, he is just absolutely fascinating. Do you think as comedians we can learn anything from Richard Neville? Like, he sounds like someone who knows what he wants and he goes after it with like singular vision.
Well, that's the
Is
thing, isn't it? Like, were people back then that did this kind of thing, like, slightly more psychopathic? Um, or was he not psychopathic but charming? You must have been charming to be able to
Yeah.
persuade people that you were their ally, to be able to go to France and secure loans. Yes, he had lots of sort of stuff backing him up in terms of security and you know, he had the trust fund and everything, but he must have been charming. So was it that death was more common back then? So death wasn't like now. You know, I would die before killing somebody, because to kill somebody is so not okay in my version of the world, that I would rather die than do that. But that death and life were not considered like that then. So can I judge
No.
him by my morality?
Yeah.
And to talk to somebody that could, like, would it be like talking to a human being as I know talking to a human being, or would it be like talking to the Bible? Would it be like talking to a psychopath? Like, you know, I just finished listening to a fascinating audiobook about a serial killer from the 70s who was a mafia hitman, and they
Uh-huh.
played recordings at the end of it. And you hear this man talking about the murders. He murdered sort of probably over 100 people over
Oh my
a
God.
30-year career as a hitman. And you hear him
Yeah.
talk about it, and he sounds like a gentle man. He sounds like a man as I understand humans to be. But he
Yeah.
says, I never killed anybody that didn't have it coming. I would never have killed a woman or a child. I killed men that were in this world. Or, you know, and sometimes he would say, oh, I regretted a murder, but that was where I lost my temper and killed somebody. But he wasn't talking about murder and life and death in the ways that I understand murder and life and death. And it didn't
Mm.
change the way I feel about them. I didn't think, oh, I've been taking everybody's lives far too seriously. I should do some murders. But I found it fascinating to understand that brains are not the same. And so then throw in 600 years of evolution and change and moving away from religious
Yeah.
doctrine. What would talking to somebody like that be like?
Oh, it's so incredible. You have me entirely convinced now that if I ever threw a dream dinner party, I would have to invite Richard Neville too. That's amazing. Your next guest, I don't think could be much more different from Richard Neville. It's someone altogether more, well, maybe not actually more charming. You've made a very convincing argument there that he was extremely charming. But I think it's fair to say she's perhaps less duplicitous and devious. One of the
Wow.
most glamorous and, of course, supremely talented actors of all time. You've got Audrey Hepburn coming to your dinner party.
Yes. Now,
When did you first
interesting that
become...
you
Oh,
say, sorry, you've
oh
got me
no,
right
this
on
is
my little
great.
nerd bandwagon now. Interesting that you say less duplicitous, but did you know that as a child, she was a ballet dancer and smuggled messages for the
That
resistance
is true.
right under the
Yes, you're
Nazis'
absolutely
noses?
right. You're absolutely right. Duplicitous, I had the negative connotations there, but that kind of duplicity, I suppose, that's to be admired.
Yeah.
Depending on what your politics are, of course. I'm not going to judge anybody's politics.
Yeah, stop being so woke, dude. How dare you come down on the side of the not actual Nazis? God.
Well, Laura, when did you first become a fan of Audrey Hepburn?
When I was a child. This is so basic, but I just thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
The eyes, the grace, the, uh, the voice, that accent, the sort of
Yeah.
strange accent that she has, how
Yeah.
delicate she was. As a child, like, I was very, very skinny and small.
Uh-huh.
And something about her just made me feel attuned to her.
Yeah.
I loved her as a child. And then as a teenager, I really liked her black and white films. I loved My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady was one of my favorite films as a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like Sabrina and Funny Face, not Funny Face.
Uh-huh.
Yes, Funny Face.
Yeah.
And Breakfast at Tiffany's, which actually I don't like that much, but you know,
Ooh.
I like it more as an adult now. I understand it a bit more. As a kid, I was just a bit like, what is going on? Why don't they get together?
She has too many parties.
Yeah, it was confusing. And then I think as an maybe some point in my early 20s, there's that amazing quote of hers, a quote that I think sums me up. she said, "I was born with an enormous need for affection and a terrible need to give it."
Oh, wow.
And that, I don't know. When I first read that, like, maybe it's one of those quotes that's not even hers, that they've just stuck on some
Sure.
friggin' meme and gone, "Oh, this pretty woman said it." But I that resonated with me so, 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 so much. I'm such a needy person. I crave affection. I love affection. I love to be adored. I want it so much. But I also want to give it constantly. I would do
Yeah.
anything to make somebody else's life easier if I could. And
Yeah, yeah.
she made sense to me. So I loved all of that. And then a few years ago, I listened to, was it a podcast or an audiobook? I think it might have been an Audible podcast on her early life,
Mhm.
and just was blown away by what a tumultuous early life she had,
Yeah.
living through Nazi occupation and close to starvation and losing
Yeah.
brothers and changing names to hide their heritage.
And the
Uh,
family fortune just disappearing and
yes.
yeah.
Um, like a really, really dramatic early life, which, was nothing out of the ordinary for everybody that lived through that time.
Yeah.
And then obviously becoming this superstar, this beautiful superstar, and the vulnerability that she brings to her roles. But then here's
Yeah.
why her, almost more than anything else, she just walked away from it all.
Yeah.
She had her sons and she moved to Italy, and pretty
Mhm.
much at the peak of her fame, she just walked away and did charity work and raised a family and lived her
Yeah.
life. And I
Yeah.
suppose I want to meet that woman.
It's extraordinary, compassion. Yeah, I think that's the most kind of overriding thing that you've spoken about, and when I was reading about her, I love Audrey Hepburn as well. My wife was, like you, obsessed with Audrey Hepburn from a very young age, so I sort of had to, when we started going out, watch all the Audrey Hepburn films and stuff. But she's a fascinating woman, and
Mm,
her compassion, the work she did with UNICEF, hearing her speak about like the genuine heartbreak she experienced visiting places like Somalia and seeing civil wars and starvation and children starving, and dedicating what could have been a very, very easy life for her. She just didn't do that. She gave back, having seen what she saw as a child.
mm.
She always had this kind of compassion, but also, like you say, as a performer, so immediately likable, extraordinarily talented singer, dancer, actor, and she was so funny as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um, and like, how much do you think performers, like be it kind of comedians or actors or whatever, could learn just from watching someone like Audrey Hepburn? The actual craft of what she did, is it learnable, or is it that thing that we spoke about earlier with Richard Pryor that you kind of just have?
Oh, I don't know. I think you can be influenced. I don't know if you can learn. I mean, I'm sure some people, yes, can learn from watching. I
Mm,
think like as a child, I remember thinking, you know, when I'm playing X role in my school play or whatever, and I'm supposed to be
mm-hmm,
ethereal, I'm just
mm-hmm.
imagining I'm her.
Yeah,
So you're sort of trying to pull out those qualities that you admire in her. I think like if I'd had her at dinner parties throughout my life, I'd have very different things to ask about her. As a teenager, I'd want to ask her how she got the roles. Like, how did you get Roman Holiday?
yeah,
How did you get to play Eliza Doolittle? How did you get to do all these things? And I think now, as a slightly older woman, um, who often struggles with the idea of career and family and how to
mm-hmm,
have them all, and would there be a gaping hole in my life if I took a break from my career or walked away from it,
mm-hmm.
or if I don't do that and I get to 50 and all I've done is a career that can feel very selfish at times, will I regret that instead? Like, I would love to talk to somebody who did both. I mean, she never went back to acting, so she must
Yeah.
have been fulfilled. who would
Yeah,
have
yeah, I
turned
assume
down
so.
having her? Like, they recreated her from CGI to put her in a friggin' chocolate advert. People would have had her back in films if she'd wanted to. But I assume, I mean, I've not looked into it, but I assume she never did. I don't know of them. So,
Yeah, no, very, very few appearances really after the 60s. A couple, like
yeah.
she did a Robin Hood film with Sean
Oh,
Connery where she
yeah,
played
that's
Maid Marian.
amazing, isn't it?
But yeah, that was kind of one of the last ones.
I suppose woman to woman, I'd want to, yes, that's what I'd want to talk to her about. And I'd want, I don't know, just, yeah, I'd want to be in her presence. I bet she's gentle and funny and lovely
Yeah,
and,
that
uh,
word lovely was one that I was worried about using because it might sound a bit male patronizing. Like, oh, isn't she just lovely? What a lovely woman. But she really does kind of ooze that sort of class and charm and
yeah.
just kindness and warmth. And I think, I see similarities between your kind of onstage persona of
Oh, mate, don't.
warmth and kindness,
Oh,
and I think
oh.
later on, I will be asking you a question about the kind of common thread of all your guests. It's something I'm really interested in. But certainly, in terms of similarities with some of your guests, these are things that I've kind of noticed. A few little things. There is now your last guest is quite something because there are some similarities that I would like to talk to you about that I think there are between the two of you, but also some huge differences as you have written about at length. As a football manager, this man has achieved almost everything. As a personality, he's impossible not to love. And as an imagined husband and father, he's pragmatic, charming, supportive, and insanely sexy. Obviously, your last guest is your husband, Jurgen Klopp.
Yes.
Now, Laura, which Jurgen Klopp are you inviting? Are you inviting the actual Jurgen Klopp or the imagined father of Clip?
I'm inviting the actual Jurgen Klopp,
Okay.
and also his actual wife, if she'd like to come. I'll find another very comfortable chair. I feel like I need to say thank you and sorry in equal measure to actual. Also, I want to meet him. He just seems so
Yeah.
great and lovely, and I really, really admire him. But also, I would love a way to not weirdly tell him how grateful I am to him as one, a huge source of psychological affection at the beginning of lockdown when it felt like everything in the world was going to trash.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
worst people get the best jobs. He seemed like a beacon of the right person having the right job and like a good guy winning and using a platform for good.
Yes.
And I'd like to say thank you to him for not sending any lawyers in my direction to ask me not to go to it, because I was halfway through buying a house when my career collapsed, and if it hadn't been for the book, I would have had to have pulled out and lost everything we'd worked for. Uh,
Yeah.
so thank him for that. And I'd just
That's
like to
pretty
meet
great.
him. He seems great, doesn't he?
He really does. I mean, the version of Klopp that you wrote is very reasonable and very patient and not particularly emotional. But actually, the football man, he's very passionate and emotional when it comes to
Yeah,
football. He's quoted as saying that his approach, it's very emotional, very fast, very strong, not boring, no chess. Of course, tactical, but tactical with a big heart.
yeah,
And this, when I sort of said that I saw a similarity between you and Klopp, this was another one that I kind of thought, like your comedy has a huge amount of heart, but it's so well structured as well. I mean, like your stories and the
thanks,
set
mate.
is
It's a
so tactical.
442.
It is a proper 442. But yeah, you got great joke density. It's so structured and like all that stuff. Is it ridiculous to suggest that creative people like you, comedians, authors, or musicians or whoever it may be, creative people can sort of learn something from an approach like Klopp's to his work, which is obviously in lots of respects very, very different to what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about him in terms of him as a football manager. I know him as a
Hmm.
personality, but
Yeah.
he genuinely blew my mind being asked about coronavirus and saying, I don't know. Don't
Yeah.
ask me. Don't have clips of somebody giving advice when they have no expertise. And
It's so
genuinely,
refreshing.
since I watched him do that in March, I've said I don't know to people. And it stalls interviews. But they say, what do you think about this? And I go, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to speculate, because it's, if it's just it could be this and it could be this, and it's generic stuff like, what's the Earl of Warwick's personality like, then sure, who am I hurting by? Having a guess. But when it's sort of like, well, what do you think about who should use these Olympic roles in which gender? Like, I think it's all right for me to go, ask scientists, and then apply the science with some compassion. That, like, there has to be a limit to our desire for attention superseding intelligence.
Yes, 100%. It's such an admirable quality. I mean, he's so expert in what he does, and then just a very cool, seemingly down to earth guy when it comes to things that he's perhaps not supposed to have an expert opinion on.
Yeah.
You mentioned right at the end of your book, I loved Klopp, actually. It was such
Thank
a
you. Have you read
funny, enjoyable. Well, I listened to the audiobook, which was so wonderful. You read it so well. It was so funny. Your Jurgen Klopp voice, it was like he was there in the studio. You mentioned right at the end, and I can cut this bit out of it, sort of a bit spoilery or whatever, but the imagined responses and attitudes of Klopp are essentially the kind of responses and attitudes you've kind of trained yourself to have a bit with your anxieties and stress, which I thought was really, really interesting. Was it in any way helpful?
You even read the acknowledgements, mate.
Oh, yeah. No, I was there right to the end. The
Were you
Hodder and
driving and you
Stoughton.
couldn't switch to a different podcast?
I was folding my laundry, I'll admit. But was it helpful or interesting for you in any way to like spend so much time writing and thinking in that kind of mindset? Because it's a pragmatism that I really wish I could tap into when I'm depressed or when I'm having a bad time. It seems like a very useful voice to have access to.
I think I will find the book helpful now it's printed and bound and that stuff is written down.
Yeah.
At the time, I never find creative things about mental health stuff helpful in any way, because you're juggling mental health coping mechanisms with a desire for success from a creative project.
Sure.
So I'm incredibly proud of this book because, there was pretty much no way I could turn down the book deal, really, given what we were on the precipice of at the time. The thought of turning down any work coming in was like,
it would be
no.
insane. Yeah.
Especially as the deal came with the sort of follow-up of, if you write this, you can write any novel you like afterwards.
And that's so exciting.
But then when I sat down to write it, I sort of looked at the original tweets and I thought, how do I make this a book? Like, what's going to keep people reading? It can't just be 2 and 3 liners. It's got to have some heart and some love in it.
Yeah.
And then obviously I was writing domestic situations, and I think you generally write, well, I write to a certain extent from my own perspective, and the things that rile me are usually anxieties about tiny things that I wish I didn't get riled about, but I do, and I can't always keep a lid on them. So it felt right to me to use the book to explore those, to almost write a self-help book that isn't a self-help book,
Yeah,
to be
exactly.
a sort of comfort blanket kind of book to kind of go, come on, you know this, but sometimes it's easier to hear it as if it's from someone else's voice.
From Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah. What better voice to hear it from?
It's so great. I mean, on a very practical level, Laura, you've got Jurgen at your dinner party and possibly his wife as well. What do you think it would be like to speak to a man who you've written some pretty steamy things about?
Jesus Christ. Can you even imagine how mortifying it's going to be?
It's got to happen at some stage where you'll meet him.
Like, I'd just be so embarrassed to sort of be like, I'm not a weirdo. Like, I know I've written an entire book imagining we're married and I've never met you or watched football, but I'm not weird. Like, yeah, I'd be mortified. Hopefully I'd be more embarrassed than him. I'd like to think that I've done it respectfly. I certainly
I'm sure
haven't
he'd be
tried to
hugely
objectify his
flattered.
body or, you know, salivate. Like, there's very little physical description, and I don't. But yeah, gosh, you'd have to do a shot together, wouldn't you, to get over that?
Yeah. You just keep a bottle of Scotch candy all night. Yeah. Well, Laura, you've also, when I was asking you for your guest list, I was so excited to see it. And you did mention right at the end that you would have to have, in addition to Klopp's wife, your counterbalance would be that your actual husband would have to be there as well. Because, and I quote, everything's less fun without him, which is just such a lovely thing.
Yeah.
It's lovely to have a friend like that, let alone a kind of a partner. Your dedication to him in the acknowledgements of Club actually was so lovely. What would your husband Tom be bringing to the dinner party?
Oh, just the rest of my life. I love him.
Oh, it's so nice, Laura. What I really love, I love hearing you talk about love on stage because you do that thing. You do subvert the whole comedians are supposed to be shitty about their partners and complain. And actually, I'm like you. I love being in love. I've been with my wife
Yeah.
for 16 years now, and I just can't imagine life without her. And it's so great. And yeah, and he sounds like such a fun guy, Tom.
Do you know what? He's opened my life up to the possibility of being my happiest. Um, I think I really struggled for a long time, like partly growing up through the 90s and girl power, and like, you're not supposed to want a boyfriend or a family, you're supposed to be this and this. And nobody sort of ever really explained what you were supposed to do when you then inevitably did want that.
Yeah,
I was just left feeling a bit weak and pathetic and wrong for wanting to be loved.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so when I sort of got comfortable with just going, yes, I like being cuddled and kissed and fussed and looked
Hmm.
after, and I'm still capable. I still crack on with a pretty good career and I still get everything done and I'm fine on my own, but I'm
Yeah,
better with someone else. And I like it. And I don't want to pretend that I don't. And I
yeah.
like Tom. Like, yeah, we fight all the time. We argue and drive me nuts. He can't do housework and he forgets everything. And but I just love him. I love him.
Yeah,
He loves me, and he gives me the opportunity to be myself in the most relaxing way, and
that is so
I think
great.
that's to be celebrated. I
Oh,
just
it's
think that
so lovely.
everything's more worth doing if he's there.
That is so brilliant. I mean, he would be such a worthy addition to this, and it sounds like you would just be at your absolute happiest within there, which is exactly what your dream dinner party should be about too. So, looking back at your wonderful collection of guests, we know you're in this beautiful castle in Sussex, the starry night, warm evening, and you've got Richard Pryor, C.J. Craig, Richard Neville, Audrey Hepburn, and Jurgen Klopp, along with his wife and your lovely husband. In terms of those five guests that you've chosen, very quickly, because I know you've got to go on, and what would you say is, if there is one, a kind of common thread? Like, is there anything all of these people have in common, a characteristic or a quality that you're drawn to? Or are they very, very different people? Which is also a completely legitimate answer.
I suppose the common thing between them for me is they're all people who have dominated something in some way, and I'm very
Mm,
interested in who they are as well as what they've done. I
yeah.
suppose I think, and Klopp would be so mad at me here because I am talking off the top of my head because I hadn't really thought about this. I suppose, given my own life, I'm very interested in looking behind the public appearance of these people and
Yeah.
seeing what's going on, as well as,
Yes.
all of the things we've spoken about what I would gain from talking to them. But
Of
that
course, yeah.
gap between, you know, the most famous beautiful actress in the world and this anorexic ballet dancer, this
Yeah.
this press secretary who, you know, is fighting this on behalf of
Yeah.
feminism, this murderer who, why is it, what's he doing, what's the justification, how do you still feel like you're going to heaven after everything you've done here?
Yeah.
This addict who's making people laugh and, you know, uh, hugely ahead of his time. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose I'm
Yeah.
interested in the gap.
That's so brilliant. Yeah, I really see that. That's a great answer, especially off the top of your head. Klopp would give you one of those little crooked smiles for
Oh,
that,
mate,
definitely.
don't.
Well, Laura, the very last thing I have to ask you about very quickly is what the menu would be. You said you like cooking. Um, so what would you be throwing together for this wonderful group of people?
It would be a meze. Um,
Oh, lovely.
so very Mediterranean, Greek, Italian, Spanish. It's, you know, sort of meatballs. I very specifically want the chorizo and black pudding dish from Cafe Andaluz in Edinburgh.
Oh my
I
God,
also want stuffed
yes.
vine leaves, tzatziki, dips,
Oh,
baklava, and I want sweet and savory dishes. So they're all coming down on these pulleys. You know, you
yes,
can
yeah.
just, like, a different one will appear. Sweet and savory are going to mix up through the evening. So it's not like, oh, have I had enough savory? I want some sweet. It's like, oh, yeah, I do want this baklava in between these things. And then I'm going to go back to eating my gyros. But I love those Mediterranean-y flavors. So it would be just this
Yeah.
unending tapas meze of Greek, Spanish, Italian foods.
Oh God, that sounds so perfect. And lots of wine, I'm assuming.
Yeah, all fizzy wine. I like fizzy
Hey,
wine with
excellent.
elderflower cordial and
Oh,
tea. And
lovely.
tea. I love tea.
Yes. Oh, mate, that sounds like such a great evening.
I hope
I'm
so.
always left with this profound guilt at the end of it that I kind of have made people imagine this and then I can't make it happen. I sort of really wish the last bit was like a kind of, and now go out to your front door where there's a car waiting.
Oh, you should
But
get an
unfortunately, I can't.
illustrator though to do a
Oh
little
my God,
cartoon
I
of people's dinner
should.
parties for the Patreon or whatever.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. I am going to have to look into that if I can ever get a budget for this thing. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time. I have really enjoyed hearing about your dream dinner party. If our lovely listeners want to stay across your brilliant writing, your wonderful comedy, and hopefully maybe soon, like we're back to normal gigs and maybe that tour can recommence and whatever exciting things may be happening, and for pictures of your gorgeous pup, how can people stay across everything that you do?
Best thing to do is follow me on Twitter. I'm at Laura Lexx. If social media is not for you, I do have a mailing list on my website, which is lauralex.co.uk. And you can find pretty much everything on my website. The new one should be up by the time you're hearing this, in which case you can
Oh,
order signed copies of Klopp, actually, and you can see my gigs. You can just watch as they're rescheduled in live time. And you can catch up with everything I'm doing there, really.
oh, brilliant. Well, we're going to add all those links to the episode description. Laura Lex, thank you so much for this, and I will hopefully see you at a gig in the very near future.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Cheers, Laura. Bye.
Bye.
Well, how about that? Some blinding choices there from Laura. I mean, who wouldn't want to be at that dinner party if for nothing else the Mediterranean food coming out of the sky in cozy chairs? I'm so grateful that Laura shared that with us and for giving it so much thought as well. It really helped me to picture the evening with all the details she gave. I mean, that's what you get from a novelist's mind, I guess. Check out the links in the episode description for more of Laura's work. Follow her on Twitter. Check out her brilliantly funny book, Klopp Actually. And you can see 2 of Laura's previous shows on NextUp too. As ever, if you're enjoying the podcast, please do subscribe, like, share, tweet about it, all that stuff. I adore having these conversations, and I would love it so much if more and more people were able to enjoy the brilliant dinner parties my guests have put together. The Dinner Party is a Jericho comedy production. If you want to hear any more from me, you can visit www.connormcreynolds.com and have a look and listen to some of my other radio, podcast, writing, and comedy work. I'll be back next week with another fantastic guest, learning all about their dream dinner party. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.